Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Andrew.
Welcome to Waiting with Love. As always, this is a fellowship style space for people navigating the messy in between that comes with waiting. Whether you're waiting for a child, as we are, or waiting for something else, we want you to know that you don't have to wait without hope, and you certainly don't have to wait alone.
This is especially true when the waiting has lasted longer, hurt more, or changed you more than you expected. If you've ever felt stuck in the middle of something you desperately wanted, you are in the right place.
Thank you for being here.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. It is a beautiful spring day here in Maine, as we are now in May somehow. But yeah, speaking of which, we're now in May and we're still waiting with love, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. What's a podcast called Waiting with Love if we're not going to talk about waiting? So this week we want to talk about, does waiting get easier over time? Do you adjust? Do you settle? Does it become more bearable? And you would think, yes, we've been told that. Yeah, just, you'll get used to it. It is what it is. It'll happen when it happens. Trust the process. A phrase we've heard throughout this process. Trust the process. And you'll get used to it. You'll just keep waiting. And at some point when the higher powers that be make it happen, it will happen. The problem is that's not what's happened. The problem is waiting has, I don't want to say has gotten worse, but I would say in some ways it's gotten better over time, how we cope with it. In some ways it's gotten worse. I hate to say it, So that's what we're going to dive into today, basically. But when we're talking about waiting, we're not just talking about like us getting older and, when is this going to happen or not. I'm talking more about like by the minute, checking my email over and over again. Every time the phone rings, my heart just stops because the phone means bad news to us, usually. And then, of course, no updates, which is always a problem and nerve-wracking. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how waiting does not always get easier, what it feels like to be in this constant, like, maybe today we'll get a good update, maybe today it will happen. And we'll kind of dissect it. How's that sound, Matt?
Yeah, it sounds good.
So, Matt, do you want to start with just the whole myth that we've been hearing from different agencies and even friends and family that it must get easier over time?
Yeah, I do. I think you pointed out, and I agree, in some respects, waiting has gotten easier, but where I want to pull the thread on that a little bit is, really challenging your thinking and my thinking of, has waiting really gotten easier, or have we reached a point where maybe we've lowered our expectations such that it just feels easier? Because I think, you raised a valid point, which is when we're in a period where we're expecting news, we are still constantly checking our phones. And there's that adrenaline rush every time you hear the vibration or the ding that an email or a text has come in. And the sense of panic that comes if, God forbid, one of our phones rings, because certainly in the past while, certainly since we started surrogacy, phone calls have almost always meant bad news, which I think is an interesting one just from a psychological perspective, because if you remember, Andrew, when we were going through adoption, it was actually the opposite. A phone call was good news. It meant there was positive progress. And now that we're going through this surrogacy journey, it's sort of the inverse, and a phone call is usually bad news. But I think to your question, yes, we have heard that waiting and time will make things easier, but to a large extent, I really don't think that's true.
So I want to paint the picture a little bit what that means. Because everyone's probably like, okay, your phone rings. It's not that. So it's a moment of anxiety and it goes away. No. I want to introduce my husband to everybody. My husband was born and raised in Canada, which means he's nice. I mean, he's not, but if you don't know him, he's nice. He has this habit of answering every single phone call and starts talking to these people. Unless like my grandmother comes back to life and called me, there as you anyone who listens to this who knows me really well, there is no chance in a million years I'm answering the phone ever. I don't answer the phone. Matt will answer every phone call, whether it's a restricted number, whether it's obviously a telemarketer or a private number. He'll answer it. And also, Matt has this very serious personality when he answers the phone, like this. And so what ends up happening is every time I hear his phone ring while we're in the house together, and he starts talking in a serious voice, my brain tells me something bad happened with the surrogacy, and I go crazy. And because Matt's a nice Canadian, he's on the phone for 20 minutes, and I can't figure out what the fuck he's talking about. Pardon my language, but I think it's important here. And I'm spiraling while this is all happening. This could happen several times a week. So that's what we're talking about. And so there's that. And then there's times, I'm sure, Matt, you could talk about this. You're presenting. You do a lot more presenting on the calls than I do at work. You could be presenting, and you'll get an email from our caseworker with the agency, and I assume you're like mentally dying inside as you're still presenting, and you want to check that email more than anything, right?
Yes.
Right? And so it's just like it's just living in this state of like it's I hate to say this, a state of fear. And living on high alert, which is kind of the next part of our topic today, is an interesting. It's interesting because both of us, because this has taken 10 years now, we're assuming almost any updates is bad news at this point. Like we're usually pleasantly surprised. There's been a few times we've gotten good news over the last few months, and we go, "Oh," like we are legitimately shocked. We are not expecting good news. So anytime we see the name of our caseworker or the phone call with the name of our caseworker on it, we're both spiraling until we actually read the message or talk to him.
Yeah.
And it's hard because I mean, usually we're working, and our caseworker works business hours 9 to 5, so we're working when he's working, so we'll get an update while we're working, and that means an email can come in, that means a phone call can come in, and we sometimes can drop everything, and sometimes we can't. I mean, I remember most recently I was talking to one of my colleagues at work, who's also my best friend at work, so he knows we're trying to grow our family. That's all he knows. He doesn't know anything else. And literally, I was talking to him on Teams with video, and our guy calls from the agency, and I'm like spiraling. It's like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, what do I do? And I basically just say to him, hey, I have to go. I'm sorry, and I hang up on him and answer the guy. Luckily, actually, it wasn't bad news, but not the point. But that's the state of fear we live in this constant high alertness that we're in. And then afterwards, I kind of had to talk to him and kind of explain what just happened. So it's a lot.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was sort of thinking about how we've gotten better and then still in this state of panic every time there's news. And what I was just thinking about that I think maybe sums it up a little more cleanly is although the waiting part hasn't gotten easier or we haven't gotten better at it, I do think where there has been improvement over the past 10 years is the grace that we extend to others, primarily our caseworker and the clinic and the agency in this process. We've become more graceful at waiting in that, we talked a couple of weeks ago about the document and how it took several days for us to get this document, which presumably should have been easy to obtain. And if I think about the reason that we were given that it was taking so long, it was, well, the clinic was closed, it was a holiday there. And I think that we've gotten to a point where we offer more grace of, well, it was a holiday, like they were closed.
Right. So
no big deal.
What Matt's alluding
But
to is 5, 6 years ago, we'd be like, probably drunk, what the fuck? It's a holiday. I don't care. This is fertility. Open. Send us the update. We're trying to have a baby here. Are you kidding me? Why are you off today? Like that would be our mindset. Now it's, as you just said, we almost kind of laugh about it because it is ironic. And I kind of joked the other day. Our clinic is in one country. Our agency is based in another country. Both those countries are infamous for basically always being on holiday. So really, there's like maybe 3 days a year they're both open, and we kind of now just laugh about it. I'm being
right.
facetious, obviously.
But I think it brings in this sort of paradigm where neither and both are true at the same time of getting stronger, getting more tired in the process, but also just recognizing the reality of the situation. I think that when we started this journey, we were a lot less patient. We had a lot less grace, to your point, that, like, why haven't we gotten the update? I don't care if it's a holiday. I'm waiting for this, and, you should be providing it to me. And I think that while the waiting piece hasn't gotten easier, and to some extent the impatience hasn't gotten easier. I mean, we might still be thinking WTF, like, why are we waiting 3 or 4 days for this? But extending that courtesy of not losing our minds every time, at least outwardly. Inwardly, totally different story. But I think it brings us to an interesting question, and Andrew, maybe you can start with this: is what do people misunderstand about long-term waiting? And not necessarily from the perspective of bystanders and people watching us go through this journey, but if some of our listeners are newer in this process than we are, what surprises you the most about waiting over a 10-year period?
Okay, I do. Yes, I'm going to answer that in 30 seconds, but real quickly. One thing has gotten easier, and because it's taking so long, we know when not to worry. So, for example, during the weekend, like right now, we don't really stress too much about it. Why is that? We're not going to get an update on the weekend. We know that ever. I assume unless like the water breaks and baby is born, I assume there's a mechanism to contact us on the weekend then. But we know we're not getting any updates on the weekend, and actually on the weekend I'm not really stressed about it. So sorry, I wanted to. So that's something I've learned over time. The misconception, yeah, we've talked a little bit about what I'm going to say here. One of the reasons we've stopped giving close friends and family updates is because there's usually not a lot of updates. And what ends up happening, at least for me, is by not talking about it with my immediate family, outside of you, of course, and close friends who know we're doing the process. Well, I guess now everyone who listens to this podcast knows that, but before the podcast. But I think they think it by us not sharing updates, it means we're either okay or content with the process or what's going on. Like, we're not that stressed about it. We never talk about it. Obviously, everything is fine. There's that misconception, and the other one I think you brought up a couple weeks ago was the misconception is things are taking forever because the agency and everything is the clinic. They're not doing anything. So I think those are the two misconceptions. Is number one, either we're doing okay because we don't talk about it very much, or two, nobody's doing anything to move things along.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that where waiting hasn't changed for us, again, I think we're just more aware of it, is if we are, and we talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but if we're expecting something to happen on a certain day, anxiety, fear, anxiousness about waiting itself on that day is astronomically high, and you're pacing all day and checking your phone for updates, even though, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we know we're not going to get an update on that day.
Let's give an example we're willing to share, and everyone knows we're at to a point where we have embryos. We're waiting for the successful embryo transfer and a successful pregnancy. We're not going to give anything else away for them, but so that means we have embryos. So let's go backwards a little bit. So imagine we're going through the IVF process, which is basically they're taking the semen, the sperm, and the egg donor's eggs and trying to make embryos out of it. So let's just say they're doing that on a Monday, just for and they'll know by day. I forget how many days after. Is 5 days after? Five. Right. So let's just say, I know it's not exactly the good math, but let's just say Friday they'll know in this scenario, right? Okay. Well, on Friday in the other country that this is located in, they'll get the report. They'll know how many embryos that are usable will be ready to rock and roll. At that point, by the time they get that report, we're talking Friday, late morning, early afternoon. Our agency is 6-7 hours ahead of time in another part of the world. they're not getting that report until at least Monday at that point. And that's assuming the clinic on this side of the world does everything on Friday, like all the paperwork and submits it. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. So we know, so if you're Matt and I, Monday we know what happened. We've been waiting all week. We know we're not going to hear anything till Friday at least. Friday happens, we got nothing, most likely. Now we have to get through the weekend. As I kind of joked a second ago, weekends are anxieties less because we know we're not going to get any updates, so we don't check as much. Then Monday comes along. Well, maybe we get the report in the morning. Maybe we don't. Could be Tuesday, could be Wednesday. And in between we're working, right? We're living our lives, and it's like, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think where the misconception with waiting comes in, and it's the point that you were making, is the anxiety about waiting is felt on that Friday. And yes, we have better awareness now that we're likely not going to get the news on Friday. But all of the anxiety and the fear and the anticipation is on that Friday. And where it's not is the following, where you were going, the Monday, the Tuesday, when we actually get that news. You're no longer on high alert because you weren't expecting something to happen on that day. And in many cases, that actually makes the waiting even harder, because to the story that you were telling at the top of the conversation, is then that news is coming in on a day that you weren't necessarily expecting it, at a time you definitely weren't expecting it. And it's where I just feel like the waiting doesn't get easier, because now you're caught not off guard, because we knew that we were going to get this information at some point, but not on that day. And I think that's where this has not gotten easier over time,
And
despite being more aware.
And something I struggle with, and I think it's more, well, I guess it's both of us, but I just want to speak for myself for a second. I'm religious. I go to synagogue almost every Friday now, Shabbat services. I'm hoping that, for me, God will intervene if needed to get this across the finish line. I believe in that. That's just something I believe in. I struggle with, though, if the report is created on a Friday, with my faith, who knows, right? But I don't believe the report that says how many embryos we have. My higher power can't just come in and change that at that point. So what I struggle with is on that Friday, even though we won't get the news that Friday, it'll be at least till Monday or Tuesday, our fate is already sealed. I actually struggle with that. If that makes any sense. If that makes any sense. I struggle with that. Like our fate is sealed. There's nothing I can do about it. Now, you could argue there's something I can do about it before that Friday too, but that's where faith is funny, right? So I don't know. That's just a personal thing.
But I do think you bring up an interesting point, and something that has helped both of us with our anxiety and waiting is in the example that we've been talking through, if we know that the IVF process is happening between Monday and Friday 6 p.m. rolls around, we haven't heard anything. Whether you choose to go to temple that Friday or not, presumably doesn't change the outcome. Whether we waste our entire weekend stressing about it and going through every what if scenario doesn't change the outcome. And I think we've gotten better at separating the fact that we haven't heard the news from what the news is, because regardless of whether you're waiting on IVF results, if you've had an embryo transfer and you're waiting for the 10-day beta test to find out if the surrogate is actually pregnant, like, our anxiety isn't going to change the result of whatever step in the process we're in. But I do think that what happens with having all of that anticipation in waiting is draining. And I think there's this level of energy, if you're expecting something to happen on Friday, like in this example, you're sort of energized because you know that something big is happening that day, but drained at the same time. And I know that when we've been at certain stages of this journey and something has been scheduled to happen and maybe we haven't found out the news that we were hoping for, by that Friday night, you're just exhausted. You're just drained. And you kind of want to just spend the weekend laying in bed binge watching TV because there was so much anticipation that week that is still unresolved, and you've just burnt through so much energy waiting. And I feel like that piece has not gotten any easier over the past 10 years.
Yeah, and something I've picked up on myself recently, I would say, the updates aren't just the gathering of information for us. One of the things I've been thinking about, and it's interesting, we were talking about this actually the other day, when we were trying to adopt and we thought we were having twins, we were paired with the birth mother. I think she was just entering her second trimester. And it's interesting, because for most of that experience, I would say through her second trimester, basically, until she got to the third, we had a very good relationship with her. Very good. We talked to her almost every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I never really had to worry about updates or when we're going to hear anything or anything. Because if we texted her, she texted right back literally within minutes. Like, it was never. So it was, if she went to the doctor, she gave us the results like the ultrasound. She would send us pictures from the ultrasound, updates from the ultrasound, literally within minutes after walking out. And if she
Yeah.
didn't, she would even say, "Hey, I'm actually not feeling well, but I promise tonight I'll send you everything." Like she was very good about that. It's interesting, right? Even though that ultimately didn't work out, we didn't really worry about the updates as much. But when you're doing surrogacy, especially as two gay, well, yeah, obviously, as two gay men who don't know the surrogate in this situation, or the egg donor if we're talking about IVF, or whatever scenario we're looking at, the updates are all we get.
Yeah.
So for those of you, let's just say who are pregnant the old-fashioned way, you're a husband and wife. You don't. I mean, of course, you want to go to the ultrasounds and the updated appointments and all that stuff, and of course, you get a little nervous too, I assume. But at the end of the day, if your wife looks pregnant and there's no symptoms or anything, you probably feel generally things are fine. Like I know I'm kind of
Yeah.
making.
No, I'm glad that you went there because I was actually just thinking about this exact scenario that if you're a hetero couple trying to have a baby, that there is so much less control, and you and I can't speak to that anxiety because you can go upstairs and have some fun in the bedroom and you may or may not get pregnant. And I think because surrogacy happens in such a controlled environment, if you go back to that hetero couple, you had some fun in the bedroom on a Friday night. If you were trying and you're actively trying to have a baby, I mean, yes, the woman could do a pregnancy test within, I think it's 5 days. And no, she could also have her period on Monday, and then you would also know. But because surrogacy is so much more controlled, and because you're working through a clinic, as you said, Andrew, you don't know the surrogate. Those
In our
updates,
scenario,
when in our scenario,
yeah.
those updates are more meaningful because they're the only data points that we have.
Right. So again, if and when we do get pregnant, everyone, that's what we're trying to say is we have no idea how the surrogate. I hate to use the word surrogate, but not that's how it is. Unfortunately, we don't know how the surrogate is doing. We have no idea. Don't know if she's experiencing morning sickness. We don't know if she's getting bigger. All we know is 3 or 4 days, if this ever happens, after the latest ultrasound, let's just say, we'll get a report. That's all we get. You know, So that's what makes the waiting also so stressful throughout this process. Is there's no again adoption. We could just text the birth mother. We had a good relationship with her. We knew her. How are you feeling today? And it's very simple. We
Mm-hmm.
can, in surrogacy, we just are not part of it. I mean, that's the thing. If and when we get pregnant, we have no real part of it until the day the baby's born. So all we have are those updates that we get once every month or so, if and when that happens. So it makes it very challenging. It makes it very hard. So
Yeah. And I think that one of the areas that we've also gotten better at throughout this elongated period of waiting is recognizing that, and I know it sounds cliche, but it is cliche because it works, is keeping busy. I mean, we know that when we're busy, the waiting goes faster. And we've talked a lot on this pod about how much I travel for work, but in many cases for me, the weeks that I'm traveling for work are easier waiting because they go by faster. I'm in conference rooms and I'm meeting with clients and I'm traveling, and I tend to work longer hours when I'm on the road because I'm not at home. And I do think that, as cliche as it sounds, keeping busy does make waiting easier.
You just introduced another dynamic 25 minutes into the podcast that I, just kind of thought about that we probably should dissect in a different episode. But it's kind of sad how this waiting impacts us because I actually could not agree with Matt more. It's easier for me when he's not here too, which means it's actually easier for both of us when we're separated. Isn't that sad?
You don't want to
Right?
be with me.
I don't want to be with him. No, it's because it's the same thing. He's busy in conference rooms. I'm busy working and dealing with three very needy dogs who are even more needy when you're not here because you're the fun one and I'm the mean one. So when he's not here, they're all mopey and in my face, literally all day, all three of them. So I got to walk them 85 times. I got to feed them. I got to, also work and also clean up the house and also make dinner and then clean up. This is just me, right? So I am more busy when you're not here. So it's the same concept in a lot of ways. And the weeks do go quicker. When we're both home, we divide the chores, we both work, and we kind of, I don't want to say we egg each other on with our anxiety, but usually one of us is anxious when the other one is not. So we tell each other that, and of course, so it's hard. Right?
Yeah, I almost think like I'm laughing because anxiety, I mean, we've said before, we're not therapists. That's not what we're here for. We're here to provide an honest perspective of people who have lived the same journey. But part of anxiety is going down these really irrational rabbit holes. And to the point that you were just making, Andrew, like when we're both waiting for news, one of us will invariably come up with some completely irrational, illogical scenario that the other has not even thought of.
I totally
And
didn't do this yesterday by any chance.
right. And then 5 minutes later, I'm coming down the stairs into your office, panicking about this scenario that 5 minutes prior I hadn't even thought of because
Right?
you
I was
were
right.
thinking that. But, as we come to a close here, I think that for our listeners that are going through this journey and finding yourself constantly checking your email, checking your phone, constantly waiting on high alert, hoping for something that's going to change, you're not going crazy. We feel the same way. And I think learning to give yourself and your partner, if you have one, and your agency, if you have one, and your clinic, if you have one, some grace and go easy on each other and easy on yourselves would be the best advice that we have. But I will reiterate, you are not going crazy with your blood pressure and your heart rate spiking every time you see an email come in, because this is your family and this is important to you. And I think it would be more concerning if some level of anxiety didn't exist waiting for those important updates.
Just to close it off, I think just one final reminder why we even created this podcast, right? Is we were waiting for a long time at that point. We had a window, so we hosted an exchange student who became a son to us. We love him to death. In fact, we just spoke to him, FaceTimed with him a little while ago. So that was fun. But basically, he left, and we were still far away from a baby, and we're gonna go crazy. We had to do something, and that's kind of where this podcast was born. So, as Matt said, you have every right to feel the way you do. We're not going to say it gets easier over time, but you find patterns. You find, like, again, we know the weekends were safe. We do. We know weekends were safe from anxiety. We know after 5 o'clock we're safe from anxiety. We know most likely the email or the updates coming between 10 and 11 Eastern time every day during the week. And that's when our anxiety is at the highest, 10 to 11. That's when we know the update's going to come. So maybe thinking about those patterns and, marking that could also be helpful. Until then, we'll keep waiting with love.
See you next time. Thank you for being here. If this episode resonates with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to know that they're not alone.
You can find more about us and this community at www.waitingwithlove.com.
And links to our socials, as always, are in the show notes.
Until next time.